Round of applause.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. Maybe it's just me, but weren't there more people here this morning? But that might have been the casino, I'm not sure. But thank you for coming, I appreciate it. I know what you're thinking, 4 o'clock, the last day of Forward. What's this guy doing? What's he going to talk about? I'm Tom Torlone. My role at UiPath is I lead our business consulting function. So, two things. One is we do have a business consulting function. And the purpose of our existence is to really look for those challenges in our community, primarily at this point around scale, and how do we figure out and address those challenges? How do we build frameworks and solutions that help our customers grow and overcome these challenges to scale? So that's what it's all about. That's what I'm here to talk about today, and I appreciate your attention on this. So I'm going to start with kind of the philosophy behind this of, what do we do and what makes us unique? We feel that, our function in UiPath is a bit unique because we really have two distinguishing advantages. One is we have a small consulting team, but it's a very hand-picked team of specialized practitioners who've done this in the market for a long, long time. So they're deeply experienced taking things out there, building bots, taking things to production, fighting challenges, justifying, investment, those kind of things. So it's always good to have a team full of scarred people. Secondly, as a company, we get to look across our entire customer base and see what everybody's doing. We get to talk to a lot of people and a lot of partners. And in doing that, you learn a lot of things and ultimately come back to, these are the common things everybody's struggling with. What happens? How do we address them? What are the successful companies doing? What are the aspirational companies thinking about? And that's really what drove the content of our Automation at Scale framework. So I want to share that framework with you. We're going to make it quick. It's a short little discussion. I'm going to talk about what's involved in that. But the overarching message here is this, which we borrowed from the Everest Group. I love the quote. Enterprise automation seems amazingly easy until you realize it's not. It's really difficult. And in order to do this well, and not just successful implementations, but how do I govern things? How do I justify the investment of things? How do I think about its operation in the greater ecosystem of my company? That's where the complexity really starts to come in. And these are things that cannot be overlooked. These are not things that you can just throw technology at and say, I'm done. You've got to think about the whole ecosystem. Good news is we've done that for you. So I tell you this, as I mentioned, we've spent a lot of time in developing our framework and our approaches. And I call it a framework specifically because one thing it is not is a playbook. What we've realized in our careers and in all the work that we do is customers are different from company A to company B to company C. Even if you're in the same vertical industry, even if you're automating similar functions in the same domain areas, there are differences between all of you. So we build frameworks and take customers through the framework journey, help them make decisions that are informed, but ultimately what they end up with is a model that belongs to them. It's unique to them. So we typically focus heavily on that. I'm going to show you and talk about this 7-pillar framework that we use to define what our automation at scale strategy is, what each pillar does, why it's important. But it's also important that you understand that each of these 7 pillars, although they can be implemented or done in bespoke, siloed ways, they are very much interconnected. They all are very much interconnected. So I'll start with that as the overview, and we'll start talking about what does this mean. So we're going to do this in a little different way. I'm going to talk about, you can see the dots on the left side of the page. Each one of those is going to represent, the challenge at a certain point. But I will tell you that the reason we have 7 pillars is these are the challenges, the problems that companies face very broadly. They are systemic. They are similar across the entire market. So what we've tried to do is to isolate each of these variables, figure out solutions to these, frameworks to these, so to guide you on your journey and help you overcome some of these challenges, and we're giving you a roadmap to do that. So let's talk about what each of those are. First thing up, probably the most common problem that companies have when they start to go from, point-specific solutions and a handful of robots into enterprise-level scale is executive support. Many companies have it at the beginning, but where they fall short is they fail to sustain it over a long period of time. When you're talking about scaling automation to the enterprise, it is a multiple-year journey. It is a sustained trip. You need executive support every single step of the way, particularly when we start to talk about some of the things that we evangelize of how do I do this? How do I think about the processes? How do I justify the investment? In many cases, these are transformative ways of doing business. We ask companies to rethink the way you perform work. Ultimately, you're going to bump into different parts of an organization. The higher up you go, the bigger the purview across the organization. You need that sustained commitment from our executives to help you break through some of those challenges. So in this framework, what we evangelize is an executive visioning framework and approach to do this. It is built on principles of design thinking and some other ideation capabilities built into it, but built specifically for process automation. It's a really important thing, and we look at it, and when we talk about this, we say this is where the business objective meets the technology possibility. You really have to get executives to understand what is the objective of the business. What am I trying to achieve, globally in the business? And then what is art of the possible? How do I think about this and say, if I'm going to make an impact on that business outcome, what are the things that I need to do? Where do I need to rethink the approach? Where do I need to apply technology? And by the way, when we talk about technology, at least in this framework, we're not just talking about RPA. We're talking about the full spectrum of automation tools. So you have to think about that broadly. But it's also important that you set the journey, you tell these executives, you show them what is art of the possible. When we perform this service for our customers, we tend to use a number of workshops. I said design thinking is at the core of this, but we also have the possibility of pulling our immersion labs into this to do rapid prototyping to show what is possible as I knit these technologies together. So it's a very important point, but the key takeaway here is you've got to find a way to get that executive support and get a sustained level of executive support. This is one way of doing it. What's the second thing that we have on here? So this is the challenge that we face. I've got the art of the possible. I know the business outcome I'm trying to chase. How do we operationalize this? How do we start to think about this in a broad enterprise-level program and effectively support the things that I have to do to begin this journey, scale this journey, and produce an outcome? Our solution to that is what we call the automation operating model. You hear a lot of talk around operating model today. I sat through the previous discussion, which was very good, talking about operating model, center of excellence. Center of excellence is great. It is a key component of this automation operating model. But I will tell you, it is not in itself complete. There's a lot of things that have to happen in an organization beyond a center of excellence. So you can have a center of excellence, you can centralize it, you can federate it, you can structure it in different ways, you can do hybrid things, but ultimately that center of excellence still has to fit back into a company automated operating model. That operating model includes the business where typically the problem, the pain point, the process exists, the COE where the subject matter expertise exists. You need IT. If you're going to take bots into production, you need IT in the game as early as possible. And that doesn't even end, or entail the full operating model. Start to think about the internal audit teams that are going to want to look at this if you touch a financial process or a data privacy issue. Think about your global risk and control people. They have to have a way of weighing in on what you're doing and providing guidance and techniques for you to think about things, ultimately to approve them. We talk a lot about communication, change management. These principles that we advise, that we evangelize and take to the market, have change management principles embedded in them. And it's a powerful thing. So rather than separate it out, we embed the change management principles in each one of these pillars of our framework. But also in this automated operating model, you got to think about, how do I reskill my workforce? As I do these things, many companies are all looking at it the same way. I'm going to do some things, I'm going to automate some work, and I'm going to create capacity. And we all kind of gloss over this. We're going to do higher level value-added activity, which is all good. In many cases, that means reskilling a workforce. So you really need to take an operating model view of this that encompasses all of these things. And typically, when you're looking at an enterprise level, all of these things that fit together are governed by a steering committee at an executive level. So these are foundational things for us. Thirdly, this is a big one. Every discussion I've been in this week, we've talked about payback, ROI, business case, justification, all of these things. And this is foremost in everyone's mind. And if I think about ROI, we think about it in the full life spectrum of saying, it's not just I do some things, I calculate a savings, report the savings back. That's important, but it's not sufficient. The bigger thing is to look at the full spectrum and say, as I'm proposing or thinking about an initiative, how do I build the business case to justify the investment on the front end of this? I have to be able to do both, and I have to be able to measure both holistically. So we have built what we call the value creation and assurance pillar. This is a bit different, and it is a holistic way of measuring impact. So if we think about what we've all traditionally done, many companies, many people that have done automation, they go out, they automate certain things, they free up capacity, they free up time, they save time, right? They ultimately take that time savings and you turn that into dollars. What's the dollar impact I have? Nothing wrong with that, it works great. But at a global level, that is a cost reduction strategy. Cost reduction strategies are great, but it is not the only thing that companies do. So when we look at value creation, we think about all of the drivers of value. Cost reduction is one. Scaling. So in some companies, particularly where I come from, they're very fast-growing companies. Revenue's growing 30, 40% a year. They don't necessarily want to reduce their costs, but they don't want to increase their costs. So what they're asking for is a scale, a little different approach than a cost reduction. Some companies are interested in revenue growth. How do I enable the experience for my customer that I can use as a differentiator in the market and actually help grow revenue? How can I recognize revenue faster? So revenue growth can be one. There's customer experience. How do I make this easy, intuitive, and simple for my customers to use and gain value from me? I also have employee experience. Same thing. How do I make my employees get answers in near real time on an intuitive system, give them what they need so they are satisfied and move on in their jobs to do very productive things? There's compliance and regulatory issues. Depending on your industry and what you're trying to do, sometimes new regulation comes out that requires you to move very quickly. So this value creation and assurance module that we have takes into account all of those cost drivers, understanding that they are mixed variables. This is not a soft-sided value creation. We actually have hard metrics, quantifiably correct, but allows you to look at not just cost, time, employee satisfaction, but move on very quickly. So it is a comprehensive method, but it's also one that's, to be fair and transparent, it's one that's rather complex to implement, but it is holistic and it is tested in the market. Then we think about if I move beyond simple task automation, some of the low-hanging fruit that we all talk about, and those things have supported this industry for a long time. How do I think about moving to where's the 800-pound gorilla? How do I get these big process intake things that have significant impact? Because those are where the significant ROIs are going to be generated. To support that, we have our fourth pillar, which is what we call the business outcome process intake. How do I look at a process, begin to evaluate that full process. And when we talk about the process intake, we don't just talk about the end-to-end process. We start at a very top level. What's the workflow of all the work I'm trying to do? Then we look at end-to-end processes underneath that, and then we apply a technology lever to say, what can I do? How can I change this? How can I automate? How can I get best value out of it? This is how you drive to the very high impact things. But I will tell you that the very first thing that we do on this, why we call it a business outcome process intake, is we look at those workflows that are in support of a business outcome. So depending on what that business outcome is, I'm going to look at all the workflows underneath that, the end-to-end processes, then the tasks, and then I'm going to apply an automation lever to it. So this too can be a complicated one. It's a little different way than the market in general has done it today, but it's also one that's very impactful, and we know it works well in production. So again, looking forward, kind of systemic in this industry. I mean, I talk to our sales team a lot, and because when RPA came out, the technology existed, the problem existed in the business, we sold to the business user. Nothing wrong with that. The problem comes in when you build bots and you want to take bots into production. You need IT, and you need them involved early enough to do the things that they have to do, to ensure integrity, to make sure they can monitor, to make sure they can support, that they have disaster recovery. All of the things that they need to do, which are critical to the environment, have to be there. So we designed a framework. Our Pillar 5 is what we call the IT automation readiness. How do we think about all of these things from an IT perspective and start marching down the path of saying, this is how to think about it, this is what you need to do and build to accomplish all these, so you don't get to the end of the of your development cycle and get frozen, saying, I can't take this into production. It's going to take months. So specifically built for this. That takes us on to another challenge that we often see in the market, and that is if you think about the controls environment, whether they be SOX controls, GDPR, HIPAA, depending on your industry and the set of things that you have to do, your internal audit and risk control group is going to want to talk about some of these things. So we have built an automation at scale pillar called our controls framework. We've taken the industry standard view of a controls framework, and that view is to think about controls from a preventative lens, from a detective thing, from a monitoring thing. How do we take that controls framework that's standard in the industry and apply it to what we're doing as we automate processes end to end? So this is one that matches the controls framework that's necessary with the work that I'm trying to do. So lastly, we have this, I've built this, I've got an operating model, I've got executive sponsorship, I know how to intake processes, I know how to justify their financial existence. What's the next thing that really enables my growth? What's the pathway to get me on to large scale? You've heard a lot of talk about the attended bot strategy, whether it's citizen developed or not. The attended bot strategy is a huge pathway to growth, and one that we have seen fills a lot of gaps, even in the unattended space. There's a lot of workarounds that you can do on processes that you may initially think RPA doesn't apply, where the attended bot injection into that process can help do a lot of things. So in response to that, we have built this citizen-led and attended automation framework and pillar. This is how we think about both of these. Now, ultimately, they're going to be a little bit different, but when you do an attended bot strategy, whether it's citizen-led or not, there's a lot of things to think about. What's the governance model? How do I maintain the control of the environment? How do I ensure nothing gets broken on my systems of record? How do I train users effectively? How do I manage and govern all that? This is all incorporated into this 7th pillar. So when we look at this, and you can see the scoreboard as we were walking through, you really start to get a comprehensive view of art of the possible all the way through execution, even the path going forward to growth. I will quickly wrap up on this and say this is how you'll see this a lot from UiPath. This is our automation at scale methodology. These are the 7 pillars. And we do look at them, and we talk about the interconnectivity between them, but we also focus on, the two on the left side. These are foundational. You got to have these before you even start to scale to a significant level. Without those, you will have a big problem. The ones in the middle are challenges to growth. You have to overcome these at various points. You can pick and choose those as you need them, but they do interconnect very well. So we say, build the foundation, understand how to manage and overcome the challenges. And then the last on the attended side, this is your pathway to growth. This is how you're going to think about doing some bigger and more creative things and enabling hundreds, if not thousands of users, as you've heard. So that is our framework. That's how we evangelize and deliver this. One thing I will tell you is every one of these pillars we have taken in the market, we've implemented them, we know they work, and we make all of this information available to the community. So we're always constantly sharing learnings about what we've done, how we've done it, how we've approached it with our end users as well as our partners. So that is the framework that I want to leave you with today. And I thank you for the time.